Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. The small town of Oakwood, nestled between sprawling forests and a murky river, wore its charm like a delicate veil, hiding secrets beneath its surface. The townsfolk went about their daily lives, greeting one another with knowing smiles. But beneath the veneer of civility lay a darkness that no one cared to acknowledge. On a crisp autumn morning, the tranquility shattered when the body of 18-year-old Clara Thompson was found just beyond the outskirts, tangled in the underbrush of a secluded path. Clara, known for her bright smile and unyielding kindness, had vanished 3 days prior, leaving family and friends in a state of unbearable anxiety. Local law enforcement scrambled to uncover her whereabouts, but their search yielded nothing until nature revealed her tragic fate. As investigators swarmed the scene, they noted the bizarre circumstances surrounding her death. Clara lay eerily still, her once vibrant life extinguished far too early. She was adorned in a simple red sweater and faded jeans, a striking contrast to the earthy tones of the forest floor. Amongst the flurry of autumn leaves, clues were sparse. No sign of struggle, no footprints leading to or from the scene. Only a single flower, a white daisy, placed delicately atop her chest, bore witness to the unspeakable horror that had unfolded. Driven by conflicting emotions, the local sheriff, Henry Caldwell, felt the weight of the town on his shoulders. Oakwood had not experienced a murder in over 2 decades, and the jagged edge of fear cut deeper than Clara's fate. As word of the tragedy spread, whispers of suspicion swirled among residents, and the comforting illusion of safety began to crumble. Caldwell knew this investigation would require more than procedural diligence. It would delve into the fabric of the community itself, unraveling friendships and exposing hidden truths. The victim. Clara Thompson was a beloved figure in Oakwood, a town that felt like an extension of her warm spirit. With a laugh that rang like a bell and an unwavering sense of empathy, she connected effortlessly with those around her. As a straight-A student and a devoted volunteer at the local animal shelter, Clara exemplified the notion of a perfect daughter, the type that every parent could only dream of raising. But behind the facade, the teenage girl grappled with the eternal struggle of adolescence, navigating the complexities of friendships, aspirations, and the looming shadow of adulthood. Born to Sarah and David Thompson, Clara was the youngest of 3 siblings. The Thompsons had always emphasized the importance of family, joyfully sharing meals around their rustic dining table. Each Sunday after church, it was a tradition for the family to encourage each child to talk about their dreams. Clara's ambitions were as vast as the sky. She aspired to become a veterinarian. Her love for animals rivaled only by her passion for the people in her life. Yet, as friendly as Clara was, she struggled with trust. It was not uncommon for her to retreat into a world of solitude when the pressures of teenage life became too overwhelming. The summer before her death had been particularly tumultuous. Friendships drifted apart. Teasing from peers took its toll, and Clara began questioning where she fit into the tight-knit fabric of Oakwood. Hours after Clara's body was discovered, her family clutched close to one another, reeling in the overwhelming haze of grief. It was in the familiar setting of their home, filled with memories, that they learned of the stark reality. Detective Ann Richards, a newcomer to the Oakwood precinct, sat with them, offering her condolences, but also asking questions about their daughter that the Thompsons weren't ready to answer. "He needs to be safe," Clara's mother had said, breaking down as she remembered her daughter's laughter and echo that now only strained their hearts. In those moments, it became clear that Clara was more than just a victim. She was a beacon of hope for a brighter future. Snuffed out far too soon. And as the detective opened her notebook, an unease settled over the room, an unshakable understanding that this case was just beginning to unfold. The crime scene. The air hung heavy as Detective Ann Richards approached the crime scene, feeling the chills seep through her uniform. Despite the autumn sunshine casting a golden glow over the trees, a somber weight enveloped the area where Clara Thompson's body had been discovered. The initial chaos of officers and forensic teams had subsided, replaced by a haunting stillness that intensified the gravity of their task. The secluded path leading to the river had become an unwelcome stage, one where nature bore silent witness to human malice. Clara lay amidst leaves of crimson and gold, her red sweater clashing with the browns and greens of the forest floor. An evidence marker stood like a sentinel beside her, a quiet reminder of the life lost. Each detail became vital as Richard surveyed the area, her keen eyes searching for anything that might illuminate the darkness surrounding Clara's death. Around her, the scent of damp earth mingled with the distant sound of rustling leaves. Officers had scoured nearby bushes for any trace of Clara's belongings, and the ground bore no sign of a struggle. What caught Richard's attention was the flower, the white daisy perched delicately on Clara's chest, was an anomaly, a potential clue that bore a deeper meaning. Who placed it there, and why? Richards crouched to examine the area closely, using her training to dissect the scene. A faint impression in the mud beside a nearby tree hinted that Clara may have been a reluctant occupant of this place, perhaps dragged against her will. But the absence of other footprints raised questions that clawed at the detective's mind. Alongside her stood Sheriff Henry Caldwell, his demeanor grave and contemplative. "We need to tread carefully," he voiced, watching her take note. "This isn't just a murder investigation. It's a fracture in our community." Richards nodded, fully aware of the connection the townspeople had to Clara. The investigation would require them to plunge into veins of suspicion running through Oakwood, forcing friendships apart in search of the truth. Clara deserved justice, but untangling this web of mystery would reveal not just what happened to her, but the unspoken fears that lurked within those who had taken her for granted. With a heavy heart, she stood up, determined. The town may have been shrouded in innocence, but the path to uncovering the truth was lined with shadows waiting to be confronted. The early investigation. In the weeks following Clara Thompson's death, the pulse of Oakwood quickened, the idyllic town evolving into a simmering cauldron of speculation and unease. Detective Ann Richards and Sheriff Henry Caldwell huddled in the cramped precinct, poring over evidence and witness statements, their conversations punctuated by the growing tension that hung heavily in the air. Richards spread a series of photographs across the cluttered table, focusing on Clara's smiling face. "We can't let her become just another statistic," she said, her voice steady but resolute. Caldwell nodded, his brow furrowed as he addressed the swell of public fear. "We'll need to reach out to her friends," he replied. "They may offer insights that can guide us." The first interviews were held that Thursday, with a contingent of local teens arriving at the precinct, shifting uncomfortably in their seats under the suspicious gloom of badge-clad officers. Each friend bore the weight of Clara's absence, but their expressions were rife with conflicting emotions: grief, confusion, and a tinge of fear. Among them was Lily Roberts, Clara's childhood confidante, whose tear-stained cheeks served as a testament to the bond they had shared. "What do you remember about the days leading up to her disappearance?" Richards prompted gently, leaning forward, her pen poised over the notepad. "Anything unusual?" Lily hesitated, her gaze darting between the detectives. "She just seemed, I don't know, different." A little withdrawn, she stammered. "We had plans for that Friday, but she canceled last minute. Said she needed some time alone." As the interviews continued, the threads of Clara's life began to unravel. On the surface, there was chatter about recent boys, arguments, and social media spirals. But deeper scrutiny revealed a girl struggling beneath the weight of expectation. Clara had confided in a few friends about feeling isolated, her laughter often masking the heaviness in her heart. She hated when people didn't understand her, a classmate noted, shaking their head sadly. With the first round of interviews concluded, the detectives retreated to their offices to distill the information. Richards sifted through the statements, making connections between words, looking for patterns of behavior or hostility hidden beneath the innocent facade. Clara's existence had intertwined with many lives, yet it seemed someone had slipped in unnoticed, a darkness that lurked, patiently waiting. In the quiet stillness of the precinct, two detectives sat in contemplation, knowing every thread pulled would lead them closer to the heart-wrenching truth. The investigation was just beginning, and each conversation was a step towards preventing more families from suffering the same fate. The dead ends. As the investigation deepened, Detective Ann Richards found herself entangled in a frustrating web of dead ends. Days turned into weeks in Oakwood, where the whisper of Clara Thompson's name echoed through the streets like a haunting specter. As she reviewed evidence and witness statements late into the night, the flickering fluorescent lights illuminated the shadows of her desk, reflecting the dim outlook on their case. Richards and Sheriff Caldwell had compiled a list of potential suspects, ranging from Clara's classmates to acquaintances she had distanced herself from in recent months. With each approach, the inquiries met with either blank stares or assurances of confusion. No one seemed to harbor hostility towards Clara. Instead, there was a pervasive need to remember her kindness, leaving little room for darker reality. "We have to be missing something," Richards muttered, tapping her pen against her notepad. She must have had conflicts, neighbors, or society commitments, something. "Let's circle back to the social media accounts," Caldwell suggested. "Someone might have said something to her that tipped you off." They delved into Clara's online world, scrolling through posts, comments, and messages, desperate for a fragment that could lead them to the truth. Most interactions painted a picture of support, mutual friends, and harmless banter. The affirmations from schoolmates were painfully bittersweet. They spoke of Clara's light without acknowledging the unresolved darkness that shadowed it. One afternoon, Richard stumbled upon a troubling message buried in the depths of Clara's digital life, a vague but unsettling comment from an anonymous user, taunting her to find her own way. The chilling words sent a shiver down her spine. It lacked context, but echoed a malicious undertone that sparked a new lead. However, as she requested digital forensics to track down the source, their efforts met disheartening resistance. The anonymity of the internet proved an impenetrable barrier, thwarting their quickest path to justice. Months stretched on with scant progress. Several witnesses recounted Clara's final days with varying accounts of her demeanor, but offered little clarity. Richards gritted her teeth, the ache of the unknown gnawing at her conviction. With every dead end, doubt crept into her mind that justice might elude them. However, the fabric of the community continued to unravel, revealing its darker threads intertwined with Clara's fate. The elusive answer danced just out of reach, and as she pulled on those threads, she braced for the unraveling truths that lay ahead, knowing they would ultimately redefine the town she called home. A break in the case. Weeks passed into a somber rhythm in Oakwood, each day blending into the next, marked by the haunting absence of Clara Thompson. Detective Ann Richards shuffled through paperwork, piecing together fragments from interviews, digital leads, and forensic reports. Her determination undeterred despite facing an uphill battle. It was during one particularly quiet afternoon that the monotony was interrupted. Caleb, a junior officer with a knack for digging deeper, burst through the precinct's door, his face alight with urgency. "Detective Richards, you need to see this." Richards looked up, her heart racing, as Caleb laid down a report that smelled faintly of fresh ink. "It's from the forensic lab. They matched DNA from Clara's clothing to a sample collected from a local resident's property, a few miles from where she was found." "Who?" she pressed, leaning closer, her pulse quickening at the prospect of a breakthrough. "Mark Donovan," Caleb replied, his fingers tapping on the paper. "He has a previous assault charge and has been on the radar for some suspicious activities." Richards allowed the weight of his name to settle, recalling that Mark had attended Oakwood High around the same time as Clara, but their paths had barely crossed. He'd always exhibited an unsettling presence in those hazy recollections. "Have we had any contact with him since the investigation began?" "No, he's been elusive, but flagged for further questioning. People have said he seems different now, more reclusive." Richards felt the pieces shift, a name woven into the fabric of her mental map now stood at the forefront. They quickly organized a plan. And later that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they moved to track Mark Donovan down. It was refreshing to feel urgency guide their steps for once, a sense of purpose rekindled in the dark shadow that had loomed over them. They found him in a dilapidated home on the outskirts of town. The police lights created a stark contrast against the dim surroundings, illuminating the grim reality of a life lived on the edges of societal acceptance. Mark answered the door hesitantly, his eyes darting. "Mark Donovan, we'd like to ask you a few questions," Richard said, her tone firm yet measured. The air thickened with tension as his gaze flickered. She caught sight of his hands, stained and fidgeting, betraying a harried mind. As they began, every question posed a new layer of discomfort, revealing cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Richards felt the unmistakable shift. For the first time, the investigation seemed not just possible, but poised on the edge of revelation. This encounter could spiral into something monumental not just for Clara, but for the very heart of Oakwood. The suspect. In the cramped interview room, the stark fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh glare on Mark Donovan's face. He sat slouched, eyes darting as the silence stretched, an uncomfortable weight pressing upon him. Detective Ann Richards leaned forward, her demeanor calm yet probing, as she studied the man who now sat at the center of this unraveling web. "Mark, we found your DNA on Clara Thompson's clothing," she began, her voice steady, but carrying an edge of urgency. "We need to talk about your whereabouts during the days leading up to her disappearance." At the sound of Clara's name, a flicker of recognition crossed Mark's face. But he quickly composed himself, a mask of indifference slipping into place. I don't know what you're talking about, he mumbled stubbornly, avoiding eye contact. Richards kept her tone even, determined to draw him into the conversation rather than let him retreat further. We noticed some concerning behavior in your past. Do you remember having conflicts with anyone at school? Perhaps with Clara? Mark shifted in his seat, tapping the table with an erratic rhythm. I didn't know her well. I mean, she was just some girl nice enough, but not someone I had issues with. The detective noted the underlying tension in his words, along with his apprehensive glances at the door. It was the first crack she'd seen, and she pressed further. Several witnesses say you were in the vicinity the day she disappeared. You must recall seeing her. He flinched. A muscle in his jaw twitched. I might have seen her around, but that's it. I don't remember anything specific, he insisted, voice rising. Then let me remind you, Richards interjected, laying out evidence pieces before him time-stamped photos of Clara near the school. Social media check-ins that pinned him to the same locations. The damning evidence seeped into the room like the inevitable flow of water breaking through a weakness in a dam. Why lie when you could help clear your name instead? Mark faltered, the bravado melting away. There was something behind those haunted eyes, a flickering flame of desperation that Richard sensed could ignite into confession. I didn't hurt her. I swear, he exclaimed, panic tightening at his throat. What were you doing out near the river? Richards pressed, catching the glint of fear that crept into his tone. What if someone saw you? The echo of that last statement hung heavily in the air, and Mark's tension became palpable. An answer lingered on his lips, begging to escape. But the very mention of Clara seemed to reinforce the iron bars of his sight. Yet the mental chess game continued, their battle of wills in full swing. Richards needed to maintain control to remind Mark that the truth, however grotesque, would ultimately live in the shadows, unless brought to light. As the confrontation unfolded, it was clear that rather than just a suspect, Mark was entangled in an emotional storm, caught in a predicament more complex than previously realized. This was more than an interrogation. It was the beginning of his unraveling and potentially the chance to unearth the truth behind Clara's tragic end. The trial. The air in the Oakwood courtroom was thicker than a summer haze as family and friends filled the benches, their expressions a mix of hope and despair. The atmosphere was electric, pulsed by an urgency that neared desperation. The trial of Mark Donovan was a public reckoning. It had become a spectacle, turning the small town on its head. Reporters from nearby cities buzzed at the entrance, anxious for first-hand accounts of a case that had gripped the community. Detective Ann Richards sat among the spectators, her gaze focused intently on the jury as they shuffled in, each member carrying with them the weight of the truth. What? Hey, well, weight of the truth. The prosecution had painted a stark picture of Mark's character, outlining his troubled history and suspicious patterns. Every word uttered brought back the memory of Clara, her bright smile, her laughter now overshadowed by unimaginable tragedy. The trial unraveled in a series of carefully orchestrated testimonies. Witnesses recounted the last time they saw Clara, with Lily Roberts offering a particularly poignant recollection of their friendship's depth and Clara's struggles. The once vibrant room was muted as her voice broke, defining a heartbeat now lost. On the opposite side, Mark's defense attorney sought to create a tether, drawing attention to Mark's troubled past while insinuating that his client was being scapegoated. Is it not possible, the attorney argued, that Clara's death was the unfortunate result of circumstances beyond Mark's control? The suggestion hung heavy in the air, riling the sense of justice that the townsfolk craved. As days turned into a week, tensions rose with each passing testimony, punctuated by tears and silent outrage. Mark's demeanor seemed to oscillate between defiance and a drawn mask of anguish, and audiences noticed the fleeting glimmers of regret in his eyes. Did he know more than he let on? Then came the pivotal moment that Richards had anticipated with trepidation. Mark took the stand, eyes darting nervously as the prosecution pressed him with pointed questions. Why was Clara's DNA found on your clothes, Mark? I didn't do it. I was there. I didn't hurt her. His voice quivered, a mix of panic and frustration, words tumbling from his lips as he struggled to make them align. Richards felt the courtroom hold its breath, the tension a taut rope threatening to snap. She watched as the jury exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon them. It seemed the very essence of Clara's spirit endured within those walls, pleading for justice. Moments later, the jury was led away to deliberate, leaving behind a stillness that settled like dust over the courtroom. As the hours crept by, the backs of anxious heads rustled and whispered in hushed tones. Hope and dread coiled together, intertwining within the hearts of those present. Finally, the sound of footsteps echoed as the jury returned, their expressions unreadable. The foreman stood, clearing his throat, the air ballooning with collective anticipation. We find the defendant, Mark Donovan, guilty of the murder of Clara Thompson. Gasps erupted, followed by murmurings of disbelief. Relief coursed through some as despair weighed heavily on others. Tears streamed down Clara's mother's face as she grasped her husband's hand, a long overdue acknowledgement of the justice whose path had been fraught with turmoil. Richards leaned back against her seat, the tension of the preceding weeks lifting momentarily, yet knowing that the wounds Clara's death inflicted upon Oakwood would take much longer to heal. Justice, while delivered, was merely a milestone on this arduous journey, a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that occasionally eclipsed the light. The aftermath. In the following weeks, Oakwood emerged slowly from the shadow of Clara Thompson's tragic death. But the echoes of grief still resonated through the town's tightly knit community. The trial had left an indelible mark, not just on the lives of Clara's family, but on every resident who had followed the ordeal. Detective Ann Richards found herself grappling with the mixed emotions of resolution and sorrow. She wandered the familiar streets, a habit formed over the course of the investigation, waiting for the sense of closure to sink in. But closure was elusive, an empty promise hidden beneath layers of unanswered questions and what-ifs. The quiet whispers of Clara's laughter haunted corridors as she passed the local coffee shop, a place where Clara had spent countless afternoons with friends, planning her dreams. In the aftermath of the trial, some residents openly shared their feelings of guilt, reflecting on how they might have recognized Clara's struggles had they taken the time to look deeper. Others avoided discussing her altogether, opting instead to bury their heads in distractions, believing silence would shield them from the pain. But their collective experience had changed the fabric of their town. Awareness permeated the air like an unwelcome guest, nudging them to confront the very fears they had previously ignored. Clara's family held a vigil at the site where she had been found, inviting community members to join in memory of their daughter. The gathering evoked a mix of sorrow and comradeship. Candles flickered softly in the cooling evening, illuminating the faces of those who held candles tightly, each representing not just Clara's spirit, but their shared commitment to ensuring such a tragedy would not happen again. Among them, Richard stood quietly, feeling the weight of their collective grief. As her routine settled back into something resembling normalcy, Richards received calls from various local organizations, requesting her insights on how to address mental health in schools and the need for open dialogues about emotional struggle. In the face of Clara's story, the poignant discussions that began to unfold emphasized the importance of community mental health resources, a step towards healing the very fabric of Oakwood. Meanwhile, Mark Donovan served his sentence in a distant facility, the whispers of his history blending into the shadows of the past. His reflection became a cautionary tale for Oakwood, a reminder of the darkness that could hide in plain sight, masked by familiarity and benign faces. As the seasons began to change once more, the town slowly adopted new routines, fundraisers, workshops, discussions, all fostering a renewed spirit of understanding. Clara's name surfaced not as a haunting specter, but as a beacon, compelling Oakwood to confront its flaws and inspire personal connection. Detective Richards stood once more at the bank of the river, allowing the gentle flow of water to cleanse the sorrows that clung to her soul. The truth may have been a difficult journey, but it illuminated the path ahead. And in that space, surrounded by the weight of memories, the community stepped cautiously forward, a promise of a brighter future. Reflection. As the dawn broke over Oakwood, Detective Ann Richards stood on the bank of the river, watching the sunlight glimmering like diamonds on the water's surface. The gentle flow of the current mirrored the changes that had swept through the town, a symbol of resilience amidst the turbulent emotions in the wake of Clara Thompson's tragic death. It had been months since the trial concluded, yet the memories lingered, twisting through Richards's mind like the branches of the trees surrounding her. She reflected on Clara's warmth of her laughter, the kindness of her spirit, and the tragic loss that had sparked an awakening within the community. There had been a time when she had only seen the interplay of law and justice, but now she understood the profound weight each decision carried beyond the courtroom. Clara had become not just a victim, but the catalyst for change, prompting conversations that had once been dangerously hushed. Richards realized that while justice was delivered for Clara, the real journey began thereafter, a journey toward understanding emotional vulnerabilities and fostering a community that listened and cared. Walking away from the riverbank, Richards felt a renewed sense of purpose. The shadows were always there, but had transformed into a driving force, compelling her to advocate for those who often remained silent. Oakwood, too, had awakened to its own fragility, learning to face its fears head-on in honor of Clara's memory. It was a quiet resolution, not merely to remember, but to ensure that every life mattered. In the heart of Oakwood, they would continue to hold a torch up for Clara, illuminating a path towards empathy, understanding, and prevention, one step at a time.